Sorry, sometimes the Wi-Fi is draggy. The expert big mouth. All right, we are good. I turn off that. The expert big mouth. Okay, I think I'm gonna close out of here and. All right, we are good. Miss Expert doesn't remember how to mute YouTube. Okay. So I'm gonna also record it. I swear I do this a lot. I'm like, where's the record feature? Record to the cloud. There we go. All right, Dr. Lopez. All right, very good. Come on over, Dr. Lopez. Oh.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for those of you who are here in person, those of you who are watching via Zoom. It is really a pleasure to be here and to welcome you all to this event. Professor Jesus Estrada, she is one of our greatest faculty members, and I always thank her because she doesn't have to do all these things that she does, and she does. And a lot of the time, she even finds the resources to pay for it on her own pocket. We've had this conversation before. But on behalf of the college, it is really a privilege to be able to bring such great speakers to the college. And it's nice that we're able to do it now virtually, so people don't have to travel like we used to in the old days. But just wanted to thank Paul for being here on behalf of the college and our faculty or students for being part of this class. I know our students are looking forward to hearing and listening to what you have to share. And I think we usually also share tips, recommendations for our students. Those are always really important. So thank you for being here. And I'm going to stick for maybe 5 minutes before I get to my next event. But thank you.
Anytime,
Okay.
my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So I think I'm just gonna spotlight you, my friend. And I'm sorry, I know how to do this. I'm a pro. And I'm gonna spotlight myself just for temporarily. I just want to do a brief introduction. I don't normally do long introductions, but I think it's important just to just to introduce Paul. So I'm sorry, I was going to call you Mr. Tremblay, and now we're back to Paul. So, but no, seriously, I think it's important to acknowledge all the wonderful things Paul has done. I mean, he's a prolific writer, multi-genre author, and he's a winner of the Bram Stoker Award, which is a big deal in the horror industry, for The Cabin at the End of the World, which was produced into a movie, The Knock at the Cabin Door. He's also the winner of the Bram Stoker Award and Massachusetts Book Award for A Head Full of Ghosts, which is a phenomenal book. And these are just a few. He's also, oh my gosh, I was looking at your biography again. And I was like, hot damn, awesome. Most recently, he published a book that we were talking about earlier, which is A Beast You Are, which is just a collection of wonderful stories, including weird fiction, superb. But one of my favorite novels, which is what we're studying in my English 102 class, is Survivor Song. And it's great. And so right now, if you're interested, there is a Kindle deal. I don't work for Amazon, but that one is on sale for $1.99, and so is A Head Full of Ghosts. And I send it to all my students. I'm like, yo, Kindle deal. And the books are also available. A lot of them, including one I've been searching, the one about the donkey. I can't remember the title. That one is available in an online bookstore. And I got to tell you, just in interacting with Paul just now, and via Twitter every now and then, he really seems like a down to earth guy, and he's funny. He really is funny, right? And he's also an educator, which is dope. So Paul, welcome to Harold Washington College. Think of this as your home, and it is just an honor to have you here, to talk to you, and to be able to ask you questions. And so welcome, and thank you again.
Thank you. And I think I already messed up the spotlight thing because my face was on my screen and I hit unspotlight, but I didn't realize that was going to affect you. I didn't realize that was going to affect you. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. So I'm going to remind myself, and there you go.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Well, thank you. Everyone's so kind, man. I wish I dressed up, but I wore it's a band called Social Distortion. And during the pandemic, they put out a t-shirt that said social distancing instead. Partly because I know Jesus, Dr. Estrada's class, some of them are reading my novel Survivor Song. So I'm going to read for about like 5 minutes. A little bit of an intro. I'm reading from the first chapter. There's a a pregnant woman named Natalie. She's about 8.5 months pregnant, so super pregnant. That's an official medical term, super pregnant. And she's waiting for her husband to come home. He went to the grocery store, which is sort of being overseen by National Guard because there's been an outbreak of a super rabies virus in the Boston area. And I have to switch glasses because I've made bad life choices. My bad life choices, I can't do bifocal. So I have one pair for reading and one for seeing. It's not that you need to know that. Anyway, so like I said, a very short reading, but just to get a flavor. Natalie is the name of the pregnant woman. By the way, Paul, which is also my name, is the name of the husband. Natalie continues talking, even though there's the unmistakable sound of footsteps on their gravel driveway. Her ears are attuned to it. She's lived in the house long enough to know the difference between the sustained crunch and mash of car tires, the light maraca-like patter of squirrels and cats, the allegro rush of paws from the neighbor's dog, a goofy Rhodesian ridgeback the size of a small horse, and the percussive gait of a person. The steps are hurried, quickly approaching the house, yet the rhythm is all wrong. The rhythm is broken. There's a grinding lunge, a lurch, 2 heavy steps, then a hitching correction and a stagger and a drag. Someone or something crashes into the propped open gate and bellows out 3 loud barks. After the initial shock, Natalie all but melts with relief, believing what she hears is in fact Casey the dog. Shock turns to worry. She wonders why Casey would be out on her own. The guy on the radio said unvaccinated family pets could be insidious vectors of the suspected virus. Natalie turns and she cranes her head and looks out the front door and through the porch. A large upright blur passes a small row of screened windows. The barks return, and they are more like expectorating coughs, ones that sound painful. There is a man standing less than 10 feet away from her. He opens the screen door and says in a dry, scratchy, but clear baritone, "Fall came, and it began to rain, left out in the cold and rain." Then he grunts, a vocalization that is all diaphragm in the back of the throat. Natalie and Paul yell at the man to go away. They shout questions and directions to each other. The white man is large, over 6 feet tall, and closer to 300 pounds than he is to 200. He wears dirty jeans and a long-sleeve t-shirt advertising a local brewery. He steps through the door and fills their porch. With each coughing bark, he bends and contorts, and then his body snaps back into an unnatural rigidity. He points and reaches toward Natalie and Paul. Natalie can only see the shape and contour of the man's face as he's silhouetted by the dim daylight behind him. Despite her all-consuming fear, there's a nagging recognition of those primitive monosyllables buried in Natalie's ancestral memory. Hearing him now is enough to know, without the aid of visual cues and without the context of the ongoing outbreak, that this man is sick. He is terribly and irreparably ill. Natalie's fears morph into a self-preservation shade of rage. Her fists clench, and she steps forward and yells, "Get the fuck off our porch!" Paul moves more nimbly and darts in front of Natalie. He swings the front door shut with enough force to rattle the frame and wall. His hand momentarily loses contact with the doorknob, and he is not able to get the door locked before the man is already forcing it back open. "Natalie!" Paul shouts her name as though it was a question that is not rhetorical yet has no answer. The door swings open, forcing Paul back into the house. The bottoms of his sneakers squeak as they slide over the wooden floor. Paul bends his legs, lowers a shoulder, attempting to gain purchase, to find the leverage he has lost forever. His feet stop sliding and they tangle, tripping him up. Paul falls onto his knees and the fiberglass door sweeps him away. The man pushes the door fully open and presses Paul against the wall. He doesn't stop pushing. The man almost fully eclipses the white door. He is the dark side of the moon. The man shouts, "I only want to speak. Let me in, not by." He yanks the door back toward him, and then he smashes it into Paul. The man and the door become a simple machine, then a high-revving piston. The impacts of the door into her husband and her husband into the wall make thudding, sickening, hollow sounds. Paul's screams are muffled. The walls and floor shake. The big bad wolf is blowing their little house down. I'll stop there and switch back to my other glasses.
And that's a opening of like you said, Survivor Song, and oh, it's such a gut puncher. And some of my students are here, so we're actually gonna be just having a discussion. And if anybody has any questions about Survivor Song, or the students here present, if you want to ask questions about the Beast You Are, especially some of my students have read up until page 87 and further, perhaps you can either chat the question out, or if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to ask, because if not, I'm gonna nerd out, and we don't want that. Oh, no, don't do that. Do you want to ask a question? Wow. Okay.
The first question's the hardest.
All right, I'll do it then. But I know some of your hardcore fans have just attended. Okay, so okay, so one of the things I loved, and because I read about 4 or 5 of your novels, but it's how you put characters from your past work and your current work. And so I was talking to another fan of yours, and we're talking about the Postal Zone Possession Edition from the Beast You Are, and the connections to A Head Full of Ghosts. But then Survivor Song, I think, is actually not to that. Yeah, it was to Head Full of Ghosts. But then my favorite one though is the connection between Survivor Song and this Disappearance at Devil's Rock. And when I figured it out, I was like, what? And that was my favorite part of the book. But my question to you as a writer is, do you plan these interconnections, or do the characters emerge as you write? Because sometimes the characters aren't in the same world, which is kind of really cool, you know?
Yeah. No, thank you. It's funny, like I don't think I would ever write like sequels of books necessarily, because that reflects more my interest as a reader. Like I tend not to read a lot of series. I like reading standalone books. But I've always found it like really cool when I'm reading something by like, you know, Stephen King, or I'm thinking like Roberto Bolaño has like characters that appear from different stories into other books. And I don't know, I've always thought that was kind of fun. So, you know, I think my brain is sort of wired to think, oh, if there's a possible place to do that, you know, that could be cool. So like in the case of Survivor Song, I guess minor spoiler, but not really. You know, at some point in the book, I knew that I wanted some like teenage characters to show up who are big zombie movie fans and would be able to quote like zombie movie rules. And so I knew I needed a pair of those characters. Then I was like, oh, wait a minute. I already had these two kids when they were like 15 years old, like, you know, 3-4 years earlier, you know, talking about zombies. So it'd be kind of cool to bring them back for this book. And again, you know, for me, the challenge is to be, you know, write the story in a way that, you know, anyone reading Survivor Song who hasn't read Disappearance at Devil's Rock would still connect with the characters, and you don't really need their backstory. It's almost like this is just the next story they happen to be appearing in.
No, that was cool. And in fact, as I was reading that, I really wanted you to write more about those characters. So when I read Disappearance at Devil's Rock, I was like, oh, this is cool. So Danielle has a comment. It's not a question. She says it's an observation on how realistic this was. She says the reading made me relive the beginning of the pandemic. It hyper-realized the fear we had and the fear that is still present. Beautiful. Anybody else want to ask a question?
Thank you.
That's what we're doing. We're asking questions.
I should respond to that really briefly.
Absolutely,
like,
absolutely.
Because like I'm not trying to take credit for anything, but the strange part, I think this is just the strange part of, you know, of being anybody, never mind a writer, just connected to sort of the zeitgeist. But, you know, I start the passage I just read, I wrote that August of 2018, and I finished the whole book. Like I turned in my final edits November of 2019. So, you know, the book was written pre-pandemic, but, you know, that it seems like weirdly, I don't know, prescient or predictive, I think is a factor of like a few things. One, like we all knew it was a matter of if not when, like a pandemic would happen. And also I leaned on my sister, who's a nurse at one of the biggest hospitals in Boston, with the research. And they went through a very brief Ebola scare in 2014. So, you know, she was able to, you know, show me and explain to me, even like a group of texts, like for the students in your class, that text exchange between the nurses and the doctors that you read is almost verbatim the text exchange that my sister and her coworkers had when the hospital told them, oh yeah, we might get Ebola patients and we won't have enough PPE for you. And you'll just have to double gown up and duct tape your sleeves. It's like, what? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I'm sorry that, you know, so I have a sort of a weird relationship with the book because like it came out in the teeth of the pandemic, you know, July 2020. And I certainly would, as a reader, I wasn't like looking for things that were close to a pandemic. So I totally understand if people didn't want to read Survivor Song when it came out. Anyway, sorry. That wasn't even a question, and I gave a long, rambly answer to a non-question.
No, that's great. But I think one thing you really captured well in Survivor Song was the ineptness of the government in handling the pandemic, because we lived it here in Chicago. I thought, and
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was edited later, but I knew the book was written beforehand, as opposed to, like, I don't know if you read Holly's by Stephen King,
I
that, you
did,
know, he
yeah.
wrote after the pandemic, and
Sure.
I really enjoyed it. I'm not done with it, but I really enjoyed how he's represented COVID and, you know, the politicizing of all that. But it was beautiful. I
Yeah.
thought that section. You know,
No,
and but you're right. I think during that time I was trying to run another book club by another writer, and because it was dystopian, like nobody was going for it.
yeah.
You know, nobody.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I did read Holly, and it was really good. And the last thing I would say, and I don't mean to sound like sort of dismissive, but like given who the president was at the time I was writing this book, you know, Donald Trump, it didn't seem to me a large leap that they wouldn't handle that kind of, or, you know, his administration wouldn't handle any sort of crisis well. So,
You know what? That's so damn smart. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else have questions for Paul? I know some of your, come on now, don't be shy. You can, if you chat it, I'll speak it. There are also creative writing professors here who may want to ask a question, perhaps. My students, perhaps.
I think I saw something just go into the chat.
Let me see.
I'm afraid to pull it up because then I think it comes up for everybody.
Oh, Megan did. You're right. Beautiful. Thank you for
Yeah.
catching that. My tech support is in your no. Megan wants to know how you felt about writing about pregnancy in Survivor Song. I read it shortly after my daughter was born, and I wonder how I felt to recreate that experience. And she is a big fan. Her and her husband. Is your husband listening? I hope he is.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, there was one going into the book, you know, certainly nervous about that aspect of it. So I really tried to limit Natalie's point of view to when she was actually making recordings. So I didn't want to write a book in which I was like telling people this is how it feels to be a pregnant woman. I mean, because it's one of the things that allowed me to do that was that this book only really takes place over like 5 to 6 hours. So I don't know, I think part of the trick of writing, or one of the challenges of writing characters who aren't you, who don't have your experience, and they, you know, and our experiences might be wildly different, is to leave enough space there for people who have had that experience to be able to bring their experience to the book. It's kind of, I mean, I don't know how to explain to do that, and I don't even know if I do it very well, but that's sort of the hope, that, you know, you put enough detail in, but also like you leave enough that a character can, you know, sort of empathize, or a reader can empathize with what's going on. And if that works, they bring their own experience to the story, and that informs the book, right? I mean, that's the only way. Everybody reads something and then takes something different out of it. I mean, to me, that's sort of like the magic of reading.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the audience here also agrees. And no, I actually think you captured, because I was actually reliving my pregnancies as I read that book. You know, even the blogging, because that was like a new thing at the time when I was pregnant too. You know, that there was something really just really true about it, and I connected a lot with that main character too. She was amazing. You know, I also have a soft spot for pregnant characters, and I'm like, hot damn, the main character was pregnant. You know, it's beautiful.
Yeah, well, also, like, I was sort of trying to write, like, you know, in older science fiction and horror stories, you know, typically the pregnant woman shows up, it's like, oh no, we must save her, you know, for the baby's like the future, and like we don't care about the woman, we care about the baby. So I was very cognizant of not doing that. I had a lot of conversations with a dear friend who's an amazing writer, Nadia Balkan. She has a short story collection called She Said Destroy, which I would highly recommend. But yeah, I mean, that's why, you know, Natalie has conversations, again, these aren't spoilers, but, you know, saying, no, you know, fuck the kid, save me, you know, like, and that's her attitude. And to me, that just seems like, you know, so realistic. Well, or at least I hope it was realistic, and sort of to go against that sort of, you know, misogynistic trope of, yeah, we only care about the kid, not the woman.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really well done.
Well, thank you.
So Megan says that she says it did work for me again, no spoilers, but there were a couple of things there that hit a little too close. So beautiful. All right, let's see. JL, thank you. How do you feel about the? Ooh, you stole my question. But how do you feel about the film adaptation of Knock at the Cabin? And what was the seed idea for the novel? beautiful question.
Yeah. So, I mean, the adaptation, I mean, I like the movie. I think, it's beautifully made. It's like, gorgeously shot. I think my favorite part is the performances by the actors. I think they really nail the emotional lives of those characters. So I like the movie, but I really dislike the ending quite a bit. And I mean, it's impossible to be objective, but I feel like I have, or I can lay out enough objective reasons as to why I really don't like the ending. Because part of it, his ending totally sort of, I don't want to say subverts what like I wrote the book for, but definitely sort of totally changes the story that, I told.
Yeah, for sure.
And the idea, oh man, I should have thought to have little notebooks. I keep like a lot of little notebooks I just jot stuff down in. So I feel like I got very lucky with The Cabin at the End of the World. I was actually, weirdly, I was in Los Angeles for a book festival, and my agent had just pitched the collection Growing Things, which eventually came out, and a novel to my publisher. But my publisher was like, oh, I want the collection, but not the novel. Can Paul give me something else? And my agent was like, oh, he was like destroyed. But I was like, I was actually kind of relieved. I didn't write a whole novel. I'd only sent like a summary, like, hey, this is the thing I might write. But I wrote like a 30-page summary, which is absurd. That's way too long of a summary. So I already felt like I wrote the story. So I was kind of dreading it. So I was kind of happy. She said, give me something else. So anyway, on the plane ride home, like the roll of most of my notebooks, this one's too big. I usually keep like the obnoxious moleskin, like pocket ones. But I don't know, like I just jot down, like most writers do. I'm trying to see if I can find a fun page with my bad drawings. I don't know. So I'll just like draw stuff. Usually it's just character ideas, little lines, little snippets. But anyway, so I was on the plane home and I stopped paying attention to what I was doing, and I doodled a little cabin in my notebook. And it got me to thinking right away. I was like, oh, a cabin. That made me think of a home invasion story, which is typically like my least favorite kind of horror subgenre. If only because like those stories are so like so realistic, they really get under my skin. Mm-hmm. And when they're made poorly, it shades towards just sort of like, torture and violence for the sake of that, which I'm not so much into. So anyway, I was excited by the challenge. Oh, how would I write a home invasion story, that I would want to sit through, that I would be interested in?
Yeah, no, I thought that too. I thought that the novel, I love the ending of the novel and the tragedy, and I don't want to spoil it, but I enjoyed the movie as well, but it was definitely a huge shift. And so I guess a follow-up question I had is how involved with you? I don't know how involved writers are with their movies, because you said you took the year off from teaching, which is awesome, but
I had no involvement, zero. And it depends on the writer. Like The Cabin at the End of the World was originally optioned in like January of 2018. That was like 6 months before it came out. So at that point, I'd only had like 1 or 2 books that had done well to my name. So I really certainly wasn't in a place where I could demand, hey, I must write the screenplay. Although I probably would have tried. I would have liked to have tried to. But anyway, but it was a really slow process for a couple of years. Film Nation was the original producer, and they just hired a couple of young screenwriters. They wrote a screenplay. They did actually allow me to give feedback to that screenplay. They might have regretted that because I was honest. But anyway, eventually, like fast forward a couple of years, I won't tell the whole story because I feel like I've told it a lot to people. But when M. Night when he first got interested, it was like, oh, he'll produce it. And then like 6 months or a year later, it's like, oh, maybe he'll actually direct it. Then it became, oh no, he wants to direct it, but he has to finish making Old first, the movie Old. So there was a lot of waiting around. But once that got finished, things happened quickly. And Night rewrote the screenplay. And I didn't see the screenplay until after I visited the set. After I visited the set. But he had told me in broad strokes the things that he was going to change. So yeah, it's a long way of saying that I had no say in anything other than like, here's the book.
That's tough. So somebody, I think it's Jail, still says, I was really freaked out. Actually, let me see. Yeah. By the scene in the film where the tsunami took place at Cannon Beach in Oregon. I swam there in the summer in July.
Terrifying.
That was terrifying. There's so much to that book. And I mean, does anybody else have a question? So I don't nerd out.
I think there's more in the chat, but
beautiful,
there's a number
beautiful.
Up to 6. Yeah.
For some reason, my thing is draggy. Is there more in the chat? I think
Is
people are
it-
just hearting things.
Oh, okay. I just see like the
Loving
number
you.
6 come up. Yeah, I know. I would say like, tsunamis is definitely a fear of mine, having lived near a coast my whole life. Yeah, I hear you.
So I guess this is more of a broad question, and I'm assuming because you do your thorough research, or I'm assuming you do. Please tell me you don't, because don't say you don't do research. My students don't listen to that if he says that. It is great if you have a great imagination. Do you study
Yeah.
psychology?
No, I mean, I was a math humanities major, and the humanities was just like a hodgepodge of liberal arts stuff. There was no focus to it whatsoever. And then I went to graduate school for mathematics. So it's hard to explain how I then like found a way into writing,
Yeah, that's
because I have like no training in it. Now students, I am with you. I hate research. I hate it, but like I have to do it. So, I mean, because there are plenty of writers that I know that love the research, and actually, I feel like their writing is an excuse to research. Someone like Alma Katsu, contemporary horror and spy fiction writer. She worked for the CIA forever, and she does most of her horror novels have been historical horror novels. So she does all this amazing research. Man, that's like, I think I would like to try everything as a writer at some point. Like I don't know, but writing like a historical novel like that would be really intimidating to me. But maybe I should do it. We'll see.
The reason I ask is because when I read like the disappearance of Devil's Rock, or even A Head Full of Ghosts, there's a lot of psychology in there, and a lot of internal struggle. And I'm like, this dude has got to be studying psychology.
Oh, well, thanks.
And it's cool that you're not, but damn,
Well,
right?
maybe it's a reflection of over 25 years being a high school teacher.
So Amy, she may have, she says, so Amy says, I love that, Mr. Tremblay. Oh no, this is another one. Let's go up. Somebody is loving you and is thinking this is amazing. Oh, it's a red message to me. Sorry. One of the fans loves you. Jill says, I love that Mr. Tremblay has a CD of the score of Alien.
That's actually a lunchbox, but I do love Alien. I've got a lot of Alien things. Yeah. I will say though, like when I do write, I prefer silence, but I do listen to, if I have to have music, because sometimes, I don't have doors. Those are curtains. So if the house gets noisy, I'll put on stereotypically horror movie soundtracks to listen to. I haven't tried the Alien one though. I probably should do that.
Oh, that is a cool idea. I also tell my students to listen to music so they can get their creative synapses going,
Yeah.
Okay, so Mauricio, A+, another student, says, hi, I wanted to ask, can you describe your writing space or what you do to get into a groove? Also, how do you overcome some of the big hurdles you face when writing? Oh, that's a great questions.
Yeah, excellent questions. First, I mean, my writing space is super messy. I mean, you can see the thing of books behind me. I don't know, I couldn't even show off like the rest of sort of like this messy area over here.
Yeah, go messy.
Yeah, with like Quince dolls from Jaws and stuff like that. However, let me bring it back to when I first started reading. When I first started writing, I just started teaching high school full time. So for almost all of my writing life, like being a teacher and a writer were sort of intertwined. And for me, it was an amazing forced lesson in time management. Especially during work days. If I could find an hour or 45 minutes, I would just have to sit down and do it. So that helped force me just to sort of, get to it, just to think, hey, I'm going to take this time and take advantage of it. And even when I had 2 children, or I have 2 children, I shouldn't say had. Oh my God, knocking all the wood. When my children were younger, it would be like trying to write during naps, or like when my son was older and I was taking him to baseball clinics. I wrote a big chunk of Disappearance of Devil's Rock, like 6 Saturdays in a row, where I had to drive to take my son to a baseball clinic. It wasn't baseball games. If he was playing games, I would watch. This was a clinic with like 100 kids throwing baseballs around. So I'm like, okay, I don't need to watch this. But I had my laptop and headphones on, and I was working on a book. So I think, part of it is like training your subconscious. I was able to train my subconscious to be able to like, okay, it's time to go. We got to go. One of my mentors, who's an amazing writer, Stuart Onan, he's like one of the nicest people I know. He used to tell me that like in his early days of writing, he would literally belt himself to his chair and set like a timer. It's like, I'm going to sit here for 2 hours. So I don't necessarily suggest belting yourself to your chair, but here's what I found definitely works. is force yourself to sit down, turn the phone off, and just be like, hey, I have an hour. And you may sit there for 5, maybe 10 minutes and nothing's happening. But eventually your subconscious, because writing is about training and tricking your subconscious is going to go, oh, shit, this is boring, and start giving you stuff. I promise that'll work. And the more you do it, the slightly easier it becomes. It becomes like a muscle memory. So I think I hope I answered all 3 of those questions. I would say now, like as an older writer, the distractions are harder. Like, I feel like professionally, I kind of have to be on social media from time to time. So in the old days when my kids were taking a quiz and they could have been cheating their ass off, I had no idea I was writing. Now I'm probably checking social media or answering emails instead. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that was a question I had, because I know that social media is important, but it's also really difficult not to get sucked into it, and you're really good at Twitter and Instagram, because your posts are pretty cool.
Oh,
And
thanks. I
engaging
appreciate
too,
that.
and you actually engage with the fans, which I think is awesome. Okay, so
Yeah.
Russell has a great question. He says, and this is a pretty damn brilliant question. When you have an idea for a story, how do you know what form it will ultimately take? Short story, novella, novel. Air the struggle.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have never had the experience of a short story blowing up into a novel. In fact, I've even tried to take a few published short stories because some people have said, oh, that would be a great novel, and tried to expand it. And I haven't been able to do it. So typically when I have an idea, I kind of figure out pretty early, oh, this is a short story, or, oh, hey, this could, be more like a novel. And for me, I think the difference is, even though short stories can take place over long time periods and all this and all that other stuff, to me, short stories tend to be about like this little starburst moment, or builds up to like the starburst moment. And not that it fizzles out after that, but that's it. Like it builds up to this really intense moment. Whereas a novel obviously is much more expansive. And I feel like there's a similar starburst moment, or there'll be similar starburst moments. Hopefully there's more than one moment in the book. But I kind of get the feel like, oh, I know that there could be like a really long, slow, cool build to that moment. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, every novel's different, but like for a bunch of the ones that I've written, I've always sort of gone into it imagining, hey, at the 2/3 point, because I don't think in acts, because I wasn't trained in writing. sorry, English professors. So at the 2/3 point, which is probably what started the 3rd act, I suppose. So many of my favorite horror stories don't have like this horrible thing happen at the end, or the biggest horrible thing. It happens at the 2/3 point. I love having sort of like some sort of big horrific reveal there, because then what comes after that is what are people going to do now? And to me, that's the most interesting questions of horror, is like, once this terrible thing is revealed, what decisions do they make? Do they know the consequences? How do they live through this? How does anybody live through this? All of that is to say, like, I don't think like, okay, these are the questions. This is what happens at 2/3. It's sort of more like what I've noticed after something's finished. It's like, oh, it's, every time it seems to fit like this thing.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's interesting because you've mapped out your voice, right? Which a lot of writers struggle with. That's brilliant. Camille wants to know, are there ways to overcome writer's block?
Yes.
Do you get writer's block? Yes. Okay, great.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get superstitious and don't think there is. I'm going to crib 2 other people's answers, because I think their answers are amazing. I really do hew towards what Stuart and Ann said, like the idea of like just forcing yourself to sit there, because eventually your subconscious will be like, this is bullshit. Here's something to write. But my favorite answer to the question of writer's block is from Stephen Graham Jones. Hopefully if you've never heard of Stephen Graham Jones, you should read him as soon as you can. And Stephen says there's no such thing as writer's block. He says that your standards are too high, which which makes you laugh. And I think that laughter actually releases some of the pressure that you're putting on yourself. And I think that's a lot of where, those writer's block issues come from, is like self-pressure. And another way I love thinking about it is from another writer. His name is Michael Sisko, who also teaches community college in the Bronx in New York City. And he's been teaching writing forever. He says, when you get to that point where you're stuck, or you feel like there's writer's block, he's like, that's the best part, because like your solution is going to be the thing. Your solution is going to be the reason why the story had to be written. Like you're on the cusp of greatness. So I don't know. I like sort of combining both Stephen and Michael's outlook. You know, when writing gets hard. Let's not say writer's block. Let's say when writing, just in case. Not gonna wood.
That's awesome. So JL says, I give my students Ron Carlson's advice. The writer is a person who stays at the desk for at least 20 minutes. That's great. And Mariso says, yes, thank you. It sounds like you're saying to make the time wherever you happen to be. Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to ask you how you navigate your children with your full-time teaching job, because it is a struggle, you know. And I love the fact that you were writing while you were watching your kids play baseball.
I mean, Danielle, I guess the last thing I would say, like, but again, like part of like any advice or tips any of us give, the fun and the frustrating part of writing is everyone is different. Everyone, like, part of the deal is you have to find the way that works for you. Like what works for me probably doesn't work for you and vice versa. But that can be frustrating because we all want to be told, hey, this is the right way to do it. You should do it. But I would say, like, I always felt like the cool thing about not necessarily having a scheduled time. I mean, I would work every day to find it, but I kind of like the surprise, like, oh, today I get to work on the book from, 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning. Tomorrow I'm going to get to do it from like 9:30 to 10:30 at night, as opposed to like, I don't know. I think if I did the same thing every day after day, it would start to get stale. So I kind of I like changing things up.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think you're right. I've had poets and professional writers that they don't have a schedule. They write at a place, or they write when they feel like it, which is like, to a teacher, you're like, oh my God, but that's what works for them, you know?
Right. Absolutely.
Danielle says, you started in math. Was there ever at any point, once you started down that career path of writing, did you ever want to stop and go back to math? Or were you set in writing, like, this is what I really want to do? I don't think he's left math though, but.
Yeah, no. So I'm back teaching math now. I took 1 year off last year with the book. Kids going to college is expensive. That's sort of why I'm still sort of still at it. And honestly, like, part of me, so I mean, A Head Full of Ghosts, when it came out in 2015, that was like the first book that did well. Like, I had 2 books come out in 2009, 2010 that critically did well, but sales wise, not at all. And I almost had to start over again with A Head Full of Ghosts. So all of that to say is, like, it's really like within recent years where I maybe probably could take, leave school. But again, my kids are going to expensive colleges. So I'm happy, honestly, I'm happy to help to pay for all of it. But anyway, what the hell was the point of that? I've also been like, one of my like worries is, like, as I said, I've always been like, when I started writing was when I started writing was when I started teaching. So they've always been intertwined. So I've always been like a little nervous, like, yeah, what if I stop teaching? Is like being in my head all day. Is that going to be a good thing? I'm not sure it is. Like, I definitely get squirrely by the end of summers. And as a horror writer or a writer in general, even if stuff's not horror, all my stuff is based off on the worst case scenarios that I spin out. It's me sort of just helping myself deal with things. And I don't know, I worry, like, if I did that full time, would that get to be a little bit too much for mental health, my mental health status? But also, having the full-time job has given me and my family really shitty American health insurance, but we have it. So like, I've only worked on the books that I've wanted to write. And I'm not saying that as like a moral judgment on writers who can write on hire, or who, write movie tie-ins or can ghostwrite. I mean, that's amazing. I wish I could do that, but I don't think I can. I think the only way for me to write something is to be like, I have to fully commit to it. And my interests are sort of all over the place. So like, I would worry that if I left teaching, I wouldn't have that financial safety net anymore, and how that would affect the writing. All that said, if another movie gets made, don't tell my school, maybe I'll be done.
But I think, and I'll get to your question, Joe, because that's a great question. I was just thinking about that too. When I first found out that one of my favorite writers was working full-time as an OIT, it kind of made me realize, you know what? That's not abnormal. A lot of writers have jobs.
Yeah.
No matter how they, like, Sina Pelayo, I mean, you're familiar with her.
Yes.
She's a social media specialist. and she stays home with her kids, and not
Right.
all the time, but she's got a heavy schedule,
Yeah.
and but to me, it doesn't burst the bubble. To me, it makes it more valid that a writer has a full-time job and still writes, because that's passion and discipline. I mean,
Absolutely.
I admire that.
No,
Um,
100%. Like, for sure. Like, I'm not going to like put down MFAs. I mean, I think they're great, but like, you'll see the idea come up sometimes where it's like, oh, like if you're a serious writer, you're going to get an MFA. I'm like, no, that's not necessarily, I mean, sure, but that's someone who can afford to get an MFA or lucky enough to get a scholarship or something like that, right?
yeah.
No, the person who really, the people that you described, the people, getting up to write at 5 a.m. or writing at night after having worked a full day, they're very serious about writing, those people.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's lovely that you're like, if I write for an hour, that's fine. Like, you don't have to write for hours and hours and hours to be a valid writer, I don't think. And that's beautiful. But JL God, we're mind building today, JL. This is what made you decide to make the parents a gay couple in the cabin at the end of the world?
Yeah, so some of it was a little bit of just like, I won't say logic, but so Head Full of Ghosts was first, and that featured sort of a stereotypical Hollywood white suburban family for an exorcism sort of story, and then Disappearance of Devil's Rock featured a single mom, and then with The Cabin at the End of the World, I never imagined I wrote a trilogy because the three stories are much different. However, I kind of like the idea that the three books had like this shared thematic arc of families under stress from both interior and exterior forces. And each of the stories, each of the books have supernatural ambiguous elements that I, as the author, never tell you outright if there is something actually supernatural happening. I leave that open-ended. So with Cabins, like, I don't want to have like the same kind of family again. So I picked the two dads, and the other part of it was because math nerd, numbers are important to me. That was going to be my seventh novel, and that felt like a big deal. And the number 7 was sort of important in the book with 7 grasshoppers and all that stuff. And when I first started writing, even before I was serious, when I was like, I would have called myself a hobbyist. Besides my wife, my first readers were family members who are also like my best friends. Like we go on vacations together and stuff like that. But my cousin Michael and his husband Rob, and my Aunt Mary and her wife Debbie. So with that book, I don't know, like I wanted to honor sort of their experience as well. And so for that book, I actually brought my cousin Michael back to be a first reader, that had been like the first time in years that he was a first reader.
Oh, that's beautiful. So Russell says, I appreciate references to bands and music. I have similar tastes. Very good.
Yeah.
Oscar Du, he says, how does music inform your writing?
Oh, I'm a failed musician, frustrated musician at heart. No, I'm just like I'm a big music fan. And like, I sort of joke, but like when I first started messing around with writing, I was also teaching myself to play guitar, and I was trying to write songs. And so like, it was a battle of creative outlet. And I eventually, to my shame, figured out I was a better writer than musician. So yeah, no, I go to music so often for inspiration. So many like book titles and story titles come from songs. And with my recent run of novels, I always try to get a quote in the beginning and the epigraph from like a band that I like. I don't know. A lot of people talk about like reading as their escape. For me, that's what music is. Music is my escape. I get to shut my head off and be somewhere else. Like reading, especially now, I read. If I'm a writer, I have to read. Like I have to do it. And I also feel like if I'm not reading, like I'm losing a part of me. So yeah, I don't know. Like with the music thing, it's just a way for me to try to get a little bit closer to it. I was just telling one of my senior math classes today, in little downtime that we had, I'd said that one of my favorite things that I've done with my writing is that I've stalked many of my favorite musicians. I say that playfully, as playfully as you can say stalked. But I've met quite a few bands that I really enjoy, and they're big readers, and I've been able to go to like some backstage, I've been given like tickets and backstage passes to meet the bands too afterwards, which is just fun because it's funny to be like, oh, you writers are so cool. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're lame. Like, you guys are cool. Yeah. So, but thank you. Yeah. I'm glad you like the same music. Yeah. So I get my Social Distortion t-shirt on anyway.
That's cool. That is really groovy. Hey, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit because this is something that friends of mine are really curious about because it does have to do with copyright. But I think it was in the Atlantic where I read about your lawsuit against ChatGPT
Yeah,
and absorbing the cabin at the end of the world. And I was curious, how did you? I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, so much. We
yeah.
talked about who owns what and our writers are making a living. What does this mean? But how did you know what happened first of all? And I was just curious about how the lawsuit was going.
Yeah. So like the bummer part is I'm not going to answer most of that only because
Oh, the
yeah,
disclosure things.
anything I say like could come up later, you know, and there's going to be the discovery phase, I guess, which is coming up soon. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's sort of my feelings on our sort of cover, like our lawyer has a website where he sort of outlays the case, you know, which is 100% behind. I guess I would just add that I'm super proud of all the writers who have joined. It's nice to see more suits being filed. You know, I think it's an existential moment for writers, and it was a first amazing victory for the screenwriters, the WGA. I think that was a super important win, for, you know, for that union. Yeah, otherwise that's probably
Okay,
all I can
cool,
really
cool, cool.
say.
I figured, but I was curious because when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst nightmare. I mean, seriously, it's just it's dreadful, you know? Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm so somebody else have a question, and you're welcome to unmute. I don't have to be the only one here, right?
Hmm.
Okay, hold on. Oh, a question from the audience. Oh, I think I'm just gonna take the whole thing over there.
Yeah, no problem. Where would you say your inspiration like comes from? Or you mentioned, a lot of like worst case scenarios, but is
Yeah.
that all or
Um, you know, I've always imagined myself as like a magpie as a writer. Like, you know, magpies build their nest, at least I think. I'm not good at research, but this is what I remember from birds. Magpies will build a nest from like straw, gum wrappers, like anything they find. And I think that's sort of like a good metaphor for a writer. Like that's how you should build all your stories. Yeah, you definitely gonna want to pull from experience, but also you want to pull from, you know, something you saw on the news, or you want to pull from something that you read or saw in a movie. You know, I think the hardest thing, uh, Jesus mentioned earlier, like the idea of finding your voice. You know, that's such like a loaded, pressure-filled thing to say. But I mean, it is true. You kind of have to find your own voice. And for me, like an important thing was to not be afraid of my influences and to actually sort of embrace them. You know, just the realization is like, hey, just about every story's ever been done. What's going to make this thing unique is that it came from me and my unique set of experiences, just like your story will be unique because it comes from you and your unique set of experiences. And then sort of the magic thing that happens is when I read your story or you read mine, you know, there's this weird, fun communication thing that happens. So back to the idea of training your subconscious. I love this metaphor too. So because this goes towards answering your question, like where do ideas come from? Another amazing writer, like so I'm always quoting people who are much smarter than I am. Kelly Link. She has described the writer subconscious as like a dog. She's like, you got to treat your writer, your subconscious like a dog. And what she means by that is if your subconscious brings you a story idea or any idea, acknowledge it, like take it, play with it. You don't have to write a novel about it. Like if it brings you something really weird, like, oh, the ceiling tiles started sprouting fangs and attacked the room or something. I mean, that's really goofy, but you know, it also doesn't hurt to think about it for a minute. Because her point was your subconscious is like a dog. If your dog brings you a toy and you're like, not now, you keep saying not now, besides being a terrible human to your pet, your dog is going to stop bringing you things.
Yep.
So your subconscious, I'm totally convinced, is like that, where like if it brings you something, you know, play around with it, write it down in the notebook, like save it for later, or if it's something that really excites you, that's kind of how I know it's something I'm going to work on. Like I keep thinking about it when I'm not actively thinking about it, if that makes sense. But it is kind of fun, like trying to be open to those ideas, like how you inadvertently train your brain. So for me, the shower is like the place where I solve problems. Not all problems, just my writing problems. That's kind of weird to say. I solve all problems in the shower. But no, I think it's just because it's happened a couple of times. So now like my head is sort of trained to think, okay, I'm in the shower, we're thinking about the story. And then I can't tell you how many times like, oh, this idea has happened, or this connection has happened. It's just like I was open to the I was open to the inspiration a few times, and that's where it keeps coming. So I don't know, just go with it.
And you have to shower every day. That's brilliant. Well, if you shower every day.
Yes.
That's great. So Russell has another great question. Russell must be a writer, I suspect. But he says, how do you know when your work on a story is complete? At what point are you satisfied with your results?
That's a great question. Part of the way I work, it was different than so many other writers. I know a lot of writers, this is probably a healthier way to do it, will spill everything out and not worry if it looks pretty or sounds pretty, and then just go back and revise. I can't do that. I just can't do that. I work like in very slow, small chunks. If I'm going good, honestly, I aim for like 500 words a day, which really isn't a lot. And then the next day, before I work on those 500, or before I add, I should say, I go and look at what I did yesterday. And if it's a novel, I probably start way back at the beginning of the chapter. So a lot of times I'm not even really moving forward. I'm just sort of expanding what I'd written. And it seems like I'll never get to the end. But like, again, if it's a daily thing, that 500 words a day adds up. So by the time I have a full draft, it's certainly not perfect, but that full draft is, I would say, like pretty close to what the thing is going to be. So like my process is when I have that full draft is when I really get excited, because now I get to edit and tweak things, but not necessarily move around like giant stuff, because I've already probably done that when I've been editing as I go. So I really haven't had much of the like, I'm not sure if this is ready, because honestly, like I just get to a point like, okay, this is at this day and time, this is as good as it's going to get. But I also have, the luck and the privilege of having an editor and book contract. So I know that I'm going to get a second and third shot at it. Like I get it to a certain point, I want it to be good enough to send to my editor, then I send it to her or first readers too, right? So I use those as ways to fool me into thinking, okay, I'm going to send it to this next person because I will get another chance to work on it. Because I have a writer friend who, he's a musician and a dear friend. He's an excellent writer, but I think he suffers from the idea of like it's never good enough. And I just try to keep telling him, it's like, will you stop and just send it? Like, this is really good. But yeah, I don't know. It's a hard thing sort of to find the finish line as well as like find what works for you.
And so does that mean, like, I know you know the idea of the mapper and the pantster, somebody who writes in pants. Are you more of a pantster?
Well, I mean, short stories, I guess more of a pantser, but again, short stories to me, like, I mean, obviously they're a lot shorter, I'll take some notes and stuff, but like, I won't like outline the plot. And I would say typically I know, obviously, hopefully I know what the beginning is and I know what the ending is. And then the hard part is figuring out how do I get from A to Z, and the end might change a little bit, but like I have a foggy notion. So I would say probably for about like 60% of my novels, I've written a plot summary first. Sometimes it's been forced upon me where, not by like a bad person breaking into my house or something, write a summary. It's so like, I usually have like a 2 or 3 book deal at a time. And so if I get to the end of a deal, they're like, hey, we still want to work with you. What's your next book? All we need to make an offer is like maybe a couple of chapters in a summary. So, there's been a few books where like, I probably didn't want to write a summary, but I did anyway because of that. And sometimes I pants it. I feel like the older I'm getting, the more I'm sort of wanting to pants it. What a weird sentence. But I feel like I'm kind of doing like outlining as I go, because instead of like doing the outline first, I'm just doing a lot of it. Like I'll write and then I'll sort of peek ahead and this is what I'm going to do next. Just sort of breaking up the outline essentially.
It's interesting. That's cool. I mean, I hear all kinds of different theories from writers that I interview or that come to school to talk here. And I mean, the good, I mean, this is your process, right? It works for you,
Right. And
so Danielle has another question. She says, do you ever work on several things at once and find you can't finish anything, or just bunker down and stick to one thing at a time?
I really tend to, or I'm not good at doing 2 things at once. But one thing I have enjoyed doing, if I'm writing a novel, and typically, the draft I described, like getting to a draft of a novel usually takes me between like 10 and 15 months, depending on the book, depending on which book it was. So it takes essentially a year, sometimes more. most of the time. But what I'll do sometimes is if I have a short story to write, if I'm asked by an editor I really want to work with, and maybe this happens like 2 or 3 times a year, I'll put the novel aside and work on the short story for 2 to 3 weeks, however long it takes to finish it. So I mean, I guess that's sort of working on 2 things at once, but I really think of it as I took a break from the novel to write this short story. And I found that when I go back to the novel, that's sort of like a good fresh pair of eyes to return to things. That can be a little bit healthy for me anyway. But yeah, in general, that's probably another reason why I haven't really given into writing full time, because I think if I did, I would probably have to work on multiple things at once, and I'm not sure I'd be good at that.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Anybody else have a question?
I just had a quick
Sure.
question.
Go ahead.
I was wondering how you come about exploring new genres. Like, does it ever get to the point where you want to completely scrap it and then like never look back, or do you like push to the finish line just to get something out on the paper?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, so for me, like one, like in reference just to genre, like, do I get sick of horror? Yeah, sometimes. Like more like maybe watching it or reading something I think doesn't work as opposed to my stuff. Not that I say, oh, my stuff, this is beautiful. No. I would say I'm very lucky that my publisher gives me like a really wide definition of what could be horror or is horror. They let me mix humor in the Pallbearers Club and memoir, and Disappears of Devil's Rock is really sort of like has a lot more crime stuff going on, and with the horror. So, as far as like, I mean, I would say in general, there are plenty of days where I don't want to write. Like, I would say that's probably most of the days, frankly. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't never, for me, there are plenty of writers who describe it as fun. I know Carolyn Kepnes, who's a wonderful writer. She wrote the books that the TV show You is based on. Her books are much better, by the way, unsurprisingly. She, for her, like writing so much fun. She lives for it. She could sit in bed all day and write. And like for me, I don't know. I mean, there are days where it goes well and does feel fun, but most of the time I have to force myself to do it, frankly. Once I sort of fall into the page, then time sort of goes by a little bit quicker, but it's not always fun because honestly, half the time I'm like browbeating myself. It's like, this sucks. This sentence blows. This is stupid. But, I just try to, push through that to get to the end. I mean, I hope I'm answering the question. I would say there's definitely value to finishing something, even if you're not 100% confident in it, because quitting like a story or a novel can become a habit. Just like, I don't know if as a reader, I don't know if people out there are readers who read everything until the end. I used to be, but I'm not anymore. And I don't know, like I've experienced like where once I quit reading a book in the middle, I mean, I think I'm in danger of doing that for the next few, just because I sort of like it. Okay, that it became easier to quit. Yeah, I don't know. So I hope that answered the question. I'm getting rambly.
No, that was great. So we have another question from our live audience.
All right.
So what drew you to horror in the first place? Why do you think that's the main genre you write in?
I've really sort of like been a horror fan and been terrified by horror for as long as I can remember. Like, even as like a 7 or 8 year old kid, it wasn't like I was watching, slasher movies or anything. I don't think that happened until I was like an embarrassingly old age. No, but anyway, there was a program in the Boston area on Saturday afternoons called Creature Double Feature. And the first movie was Kaiju, Godzilla, Gamera. And that's what drew me in because, like most little kids, I love dinosaurs. So Godzilla to me was just like another dinosaur. But then the second movie was a horror movie, and they were probably like, really cheesy black and white ones. Some of them like Attack of the Killer Shrews and stuff like that. Things that are absurd if you watch now. But as a kid, that really scared me. I still remember having a Attack of the Killer Shrews nightmare, a very specific nightmare. So I know I'd always had like this like love and terrified relationship with horror. Like I was a scaredy cat. I had nightmares all the time, still do. And when I was a kid, an early teen, and maybe even regular teen, I would sleep with stuffed animals around my head like a fortress, with a little breathy hole. I shared my bedroom with my younger brother, And when it was time to go upstairs at night, I would send him upstairs first, like the canary in the coal mine. And if he survived, then I could go upstairs to bed. So I don't know, my imagination is just sort of has always gone there. Like, the idea of like, me spinning through worst case scenarios. So I don't know, I've just always been interested in it. And now as an adult and as a writer, monsters are cool. Let's not forget that part of it. Like there's still that sort of excitement about horror, but sort of the other half of it, the more artistic, for lack of a better phrase, side of my interest in it is, I talked about earlier about the reveal, the horrific truth, and then the questions that get asked after. I mean, all stories, all art reveals some sort of truth, and all art asks stories. Asks questions about characters or asks questions of you. And I just think horror can get at like some of the hardest, stickiest questions in really interesting ways when it's done well.
Yeah, for sure. Jill wants to know, what was the first horror film that kept you awake for days?
I don't know what the first, stuff with like, there was a movie called Trilogy of Terror. It was a made for TV movie and Karen Black was the star and there were 3 stories. I didn't even see the whole movie. I just saw commercials for it on TV. That was enough to give me nightmares. My father and my aunt, the same aunt that I mentioned for The Cabin at the End of the World, I remember them. I was like 7 or 8 and they'd just come back from seeing Alien, and listening to them talk about the movie. I didn't even see the movie. Listening to them talk about the movie, gave me nightmares. But I will say, so I think the first movie that I remember, because it gave me by far the most nightmares, was I saw Jaws when I was like summer of 5th grade, maybe. So what's that, 11-ish? Yeah, and that broke my brain. And I'm not exaggerating. I had shark nightmares for at least 10 years. Like I would have regular dreams start off, but by the end of it, I'd be in water and then a shark would attack and then I would wake up. Not so fun. So I love Jaws. I've seen it like 50 times, but I still can't watch Quint get bit in half. I've seen much more gory things, than that scene. But like, I'm afraid if I watch the scene, my brain will go back to where it was when I first saw it.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, Jill says yes. That was a terrifying program. Cool. I'm doing the teacher pause. I'm not very good at it though.
The teacher pause, yeah.
Anybody else have questions, or maybe they want to talk about his other work that you've read?
Me? Sorry, no?
No, them to
Oh,
ask
okay,
about. Hold up. Live audience again.
I really like the first short story, and the Beast Stew are the one with
thank
the
you.
lemonade and the haunted, and not the haunted house, and the house. I thought that
Yeah.
was just like really good. What was your idea for that, or original idea for it? Or,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the story, they're referencing, it's called Ice Cold Lemonade, 25 cents, and it has a strike through in the actual title. And then it says Haunted House Tours, 25 or 50 cents or whatever it is. It sort of started with my daughter, when she was younger, did the kid thing of setting up a lemonade stand outside in the driveway. It was like the first day, it's like fun and cool, like, oh, that's fun. But then she kept wanting to do it. I was like, oh, which was kind of a pain for me, bring the table out. But more like you had to worry about like sort of what people were going to stop and buy, beverages from my, 8, 9, 10-year-old daughter at the time. And she had a friend with her too. So of course, like, the worst case scenarios start spinning, but also some fun scenarios too. Not always the worst case scenario. Like, you think you worry about who's going to show up. But then I just had a thought, I was like, oh, what if like Emma decided to stop selling lemonade, start selling tours of the house? Like that'd be really weird. So like the conceit of the story is that these kids one day were selling lemonade and the next day they crossed it out and we're selling tours of our house, but they're claiming that their house was haunted. So I'd had that sort of notion stick around for a little while, but didn't write it until an editor asked me for a short story. And I was like, oh, okay. Asked me for a ghost story. It's like, okay, I'll have to write this as a ghost story.
That was really great. And especially, what really creeped me out was that picture in the story. And I know it was meant to, but I kept going back to it. Like, this is really creepy, right?
Yeah. my
Did
poor
you draw
daughter.
that?
No, my daughter drew that when she was 12. And that was like apparently so not my shark nightmares, but she said, "Oh yeah, this comes to me in all my nightmares and kills me." Like that's terrifying. I'm really sorry, but can I use that in the book or in the story?
Yeah, hold on, I'll follow up.
I was actually really fascinated by the whole idea of the stealing the picture and then getting the ghost haunting him. Or I really like the whole idea of like almost the idea of like stealing something of her in a way that wasn't
Right.
just, a picture or whatever. What was your idea for that as well?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it sort of that kind of part of it just sort of came again. Now, so much of it is trusting your subconscious, like if your story brings you ideas. So I think I just sort of went with it. But sort of now, like in the aftermath of the story, the main character is a writer, right? I think so. I think the main character is a writer.
Yeah, he becomes a writer.
Yeah. The main character is a writer who's very much like me. So, I think there's, some anxieties of like, hey, as he took her drawing, like as us as writers, we're borrowing people's stuff. Like, how does that change us? What does that do to us? What is, what's the line? Like, obviously in the short story, that kid crosses a line because she's very, upset with him. She had shared sort of a very personal thing that this drawing was referenced to. But he took it anyway, just because he was feeling butthurt essentially. So I mean, I think you could draw sort of a line to, as a writer, like again, like where, I talked about being a magpie, but can you go too far with that? And I'm not talking about plagiarism, that's boring and obvious. I'm more talking about like the moral sort of boundaries of, what stories, what pieces can you use or should you use?
Yeah, well, that was great. You know what story still cracks me up was the story I referenced earlier, the Postal Zone, the Possession edition, where one of the commenters is talking about your ending of A Head Full of Ghosts.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we were laughing. I mean, virtually like cracking up, and that was
Thanks.
that was great. And that's I don't know. That's why I'm saying it's so funny. If I really recommend that you get the collection because it's so good.
Thank you.
Too, yeah, for sure. But anybody else? I know we're here till 6:30, but the man is a teacher, and I'm sure he's got a lot of work to do. So I don't like to cut stuff short. But what is it, like 7:30? That's not too late,
Yeah, I mean, if people are done, we're done. But I have another 10 minutes or so in me, if needed.
Oh, here we go. Russell says, I have a few editions of your books from SST Publications. I love the work they do. He said, or he asked, to what extent are you involved in the presentation artwork of the physical book? Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah. So Paul Fry at SST is such a cool guy. He's so great to work with. He definitely sort of includes me on every step. With the first book I did with him was so these are so Russell is referencing like limited edition versions of books that have already been published. So typically, like the limited editions are printed on like fancier paper and look nicer, and will like have additions into it. Like usually for most of these books, it's been artwork. There's an Italian artist named Daniel Serra who draws the cover. He draws other images for the book, and then in the back, like I'll include like maybe things I edited out or anyway. So each book gets a little something special. I haven't really. I've tried to leave the art to the artist kind of thing. Like I think I've only made some comments maybe a couple of times because with Daniel, there is the challenge of he's Italian and doesn't read English, and not all these books are in Italian. So he's kind of just going off of the descriptions that Paul, the publisher, gives him for what a picture should look like. So sometimes I'm like, that this one didn't quite work. And he doesn't send me the full like worked up thing. He'll send me like a very rough, like 3-minute circles and ovals on a page and say, hey, this is what it's going to be. And then maybe I'll say, nah, maybe not that. It should be something like this. But for the most part, Paul just sort of runs with it. And he does an amazing job. And he's so great to work with. And I've never heard a negative thing said by anyone who buys books from him. It's, Paul just sounds like he's just a really stand-up person.
That's awesome. That actually, you mentioned some of the bits at the end that I love, especially when you break down chapters or have ideas. I don't think that I haven't gotten to the end of the PCR, but do you think you might include that kind of stuff in the next novel? Because I think as a reader and a writer, it's really fascinating to me, even where the inspiration comes from. Like, I just love seeing that chart that you had, like this idea with the graphic.
Well, thanks. I mean, so like, and Steve, when I first fell in love with reading, like a lot of people, was Stephen King, in his short story collections, he would have sort of story notes at the end. And I always loved those. But, I know there's some readers who don't care for that. And I know some writers who really don't care for that, but I've always thought they were fun. Anyway, with A Head Full of Ghosts, the publisher said, hey, we're going to put out in the paperback, we want some extra stuff for the paperback. And first they made me do the library club questions. Never again. That was so hard. Or book club questions. Sometimes books will have like suggestions. That was just really hard to come up with. But I said, hey, I could write like with A Head Full of Ghosts in particular, it's like it would be kind of fun to write a liner note section because I could talk about all the references to other movies and other books and stuff like that. So then it just sort of became a tradition. Like with the next book, the publisher said, okay, what are you writing for this next one? Like, oh, so I have actually done it for most of the novels as well. But they typically haven't been published until the paperback.
Because I got the hardback edition, duh.
Yeah. But I try to post like online for people because I want people to buy the hardcover. Like I don't want you guys to lose out. So I usually post some of those things online. If you mention which book, I can send it to you.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. No, I actually love that. And I encourage people to do it if they're about like, look at what Paul Tremblay is doing. This is so awesome. Let's bring this back. It's fascinating. And I just dig it. I think it's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. Said my husband and my toddler are also listening. My husband wants me to tell you that we both really loved Head Full of Ghosts.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. He's a huge fan of yours. Does he have a question, Megan?
No, I'm just going to pick something up. Just since you mentioned A Head Full of Ghosts, it just happens to be sitting next to my desk. This was the book that helped me decide. Oh, you know what? I'm going to write this weird possession novel. It's a book. It's a collection of essays about the movie The Exorcist, and also interviews with William Blatty and stuff like that. I have it out because in a couple of weeks, I got invited to introduce the movie in New York City, which will be a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, I am so looking forward to that movie. That movie looks creepy as hell.
Oh, this is the original. Oh, what? Are you talking? Which movie?
There's a new Exorcist movie coming out.
Oh, yes.
Get possessed. But you're talking about the introduction.
Yeah, I'm gonna introduce a screening of the original cut of the movie.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really disturbing movie. I didn't get the pleasure of seeing that in the theater.
I've never seen it in theater either, so I'm excited about that part of it.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else have a few more questions? We got like a few minutes left. This has been so amazing, Paul. I knew you, and like, dude, so awesome. It really is from a lot of
So my cup is An American Werewolf in London. I know I'm such a pathetic horror fan at heart.
And the sad thing is I've seen all those movies multiple times.
Yeah.
I'm also really excited to see that creature feature thing you did with like Josh Malerman and Stephen King. I haven't gotten those yet, but I got your last short work. I think that was pretty awesome. In fact, I love that. I love, because I think sometimes, I mean, I don't know, you're probably going to hate me for saying this. When writers produce too many books, it gets to be too much. Like one a year is good for me, maybe two. But when it's more, I'm like, but a short work in between there is so brilliant, dig that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you. I mean, I think one book every 2 years is probably more. Then people get excited by the time 2 years roll around. I think one book a year is kind of hard to carry that, but.
Some people do it, and it's just like, come on, stop it. No, I'm not. First of all, I'm on a professor salary. I can't afford to buy all your damn books, you know, and get in trouble with my husband. But here we go. One more.
So, do you have any, what's the right word, tips for future writers, or how future writers should best work on their own stuff?
Yeah. I think one thing is, and it's hard to do, is just two things, not one thing, two. One, give yourself permission to be patient. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with your stories. Writing is, whether it's a career or just something that's fun to do, it's not a sprint. And I think it's getting harder and harder to be patient, especially if you are online. if you are online and you see people talking about, oh, these amazing, great things that they're doing, and it makes you feel like, oh, I'm not writing enough, I'm not good enough. Those are the kind of things that you have to try to shut out. So I say, like, give yourself permission to be patient. Like, it's okay if it's okay if you write a novel and it takes a couple of years to find an agent, or if that novel gets rejected by everybody. It's going to hurt. It's going to be a bummer, but like with the writing of that novel, that taught you so much so the next novel is going to be even better. So that's sort of the patient part of it. Like, The Little Sleep was my first published novel. It was the 4th and a half one that I had written. It took me 2 years to find an agent, 2 years and hundreds of rejects. But I kept at it. And the book that I got my agent with, we were unable to sell, but that book did its job. It got me my agent. And then, then things started moving a little bit quicker. So the patience thing is one. And also too, like, be kind to yourself. And whatever way you want to take that to be, like, I guess go into it knowing that if you're really doubting what you're writing and not feeling good about it, know that 95% of writers feel the same way about their own work. And the other 5% are psychopaths.
That's brilliant. Yeah, they're saying that's really great advice. That's wonderful. But look, even the fact that you got an agent in 2 years, that's amazing. I often see people complain about agents this and agents that, and just keep at it.
Yeah, it's hard.
We have one latecomer, Michael Palmer. All right. Any other questions for Paul? I did record it, and it is live streaming on my YouTube channel. And if you want to look, even still, I hate to promote myself, but we need more people in that book club because it is such a good time. If you want to hit me up, low stakes. I'm only putting it out there because it took me so long to find people to want to do a book club, and thank God it was Paul Tremblay's book.
Well, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And the library put your books in the database, which is great because then more people can teach them. And I really do recommend teaching Survivor Song, even though we haven't really gotten into the meat of it. It's a really great book. Super fantastic. Any of these. Well, Paul, listen, this has been just brilliant. I know you're very busy and a teacher, but this has been wonderful. The advice, all the story. I'm sorry about the ChatGPT question, but I was so curious.
No. Thank you for asking.
Wonderful.
Yeah, don't apologize for asking that. Like,
look, just know that
I hope everybody asks about it. Yeah.
No, a lot of us are rooting for you. A lot of people here that I talk to, and so I hope everything works out for you and the other writers. But certainly love your work. Huge fan, and just want to let's unmute and give him a huge round of applause because this has been amazing. Yeah. What's up?
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you for asking so many questions. Listen, think of this as your second home. Hope to build this and make it better and, get your coin. But this has been wonderful. But thank you, Paul. Thank you. And thank you for everything you do. This has been so inspiring, I think, it's been really inspiring for me. I hate to be so subjective, but I love the fact that somebody said, it's cool if you just write for 1 hour a day. Megan says, thank you. I call me Heather. We're colleagues. Anytime. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jesus. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Cool. And I'm going to do Creative Commons, so you can use the video all you want, if you want to chop it up and do snippets of it, however. All right, cool beans. All right, have a good night, everybody. Read The Beast You Are. He's got another short work. And
thanks, everybody.
Paul Tremblay, you're going to love it. All right, take care, everybody. Good night. Right.